Welcome to the clinical cookout. You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. Bold, educated queens taking the lead, hold their hands and they'll help you succeed. Lay your head back, relax, just like that. Now listen to, learn, and your problems will burn away. Cookout, you know, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the cookout.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Clinical Cookout, and we are about to jump into our hot sauce.
Our hot sauce is when we talk about trending topics and we relate them to mental health. Let's get it.
All right, so since we are doing personality disorders, the hot sauce today is, are they a narcissist or are they just an asshole? Because narcissism has just been trending. There are literal groups on social media. I survived a narcissist. I know this person is a narcissist. I know this person. And people say it, and it's very much overused. And a lot of the times, the person is not a narcissist. They are really just an asshole. So how do y'all feel about how narcissism has become this trending topic?
I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm just going to be straight up honest with you, because I think a lot of these clinical terms have been misconstrued. And we are not, as clinicians, we have to hold there's an ethical component to us, misdiagnosing or underdiagnosing and things of that nature. So when I hear those clinical terms being pulled into the public without people being able to explain what that means, because if you ask somebody if someone is narcissistic, what are they going to tell you? What are they going to say? I'll be very curious as what that explanation is. And 9 times out of 10, that explanation is not what's in the clinical handbook. So I am just not a fan of the overuse of the word. I'm just not.
When you ask, they'd be like, everything is about him. And then he'd be gaslighting me. And then he'd be cheating all the time. And then be lying too. That's their definition of the narcissist.
And you know what's funny to me is that they say this person is a narcissist, and I'm like, do you understand what you said? Like, does this person have narcissistic traits like everyone does, or do they have narcissistic personality disorder, which is totally different?
Yeah, it is totally different. And I think people's perception of what narcissistic personality disorder looks like is all negative. And I've evaluated people and diagnosed with narcissistic personality, and they're not, mean people who are trying to ruin your lives or whatever. It's just that they're self-centered and the world is about them. The lack of empathy is not always just like, oh, I don't give a shit about you, whatever, I'm gonna do me. It's just more of like, I'm in my own world. This is my world. I run this. I'm unique. I'm special. I have these wonderful abilities. And that just comes with a lack of awareness of other people's struggles and emotions. So I just don't like the fact that they automatically associate narcissism with being a negative or a bad person when that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm.
I also see narcissism associated with abuse. A lot of people tend to be like, oh, he's done this, like, engaged in like, physical aggression or something of that nature. And it's always it seems like it's being paired with abuse. And I'm like, those are 2 different things. Like, a narcissist is not I'm not saying he cannot have narcissistic traits. It's just that somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, at least from my clinical experience, has not been an abusive person, and they're not intentionally trying to physically harm you in those ways. Not saying that they can't. It's just not something that typically is associated to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes people with narcissistic personality disorder, they can be emotionally abusive to other people, and it's unintentionally. And the reason why it's unintentionally is because they don't know that, like Auntie Amber was saying, they're not necessarily intentionally trying to hurt everybody else. They're just saying, it's about me. It's my world and everybody else is living in it. But if you think about it, right? If you really think about it, who's the main character in your story? Who's the main character in everybody? Everybody's the main character in their own story. So that might be a little bit of a tinge of narcissism, but that's more the normal spectrum side. What we're talking about is when, wait a minute, your world is about me too. I'm the main character in my story, your story, and I should be the main character in everybody's story.
Yes. I'm glad you brought up the spectrum, because I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a spectrum. There is a narcissism spectrum scale. And some people got a little bit upset one time when I said everybody has a touch of narcissism. Everybody has narcissistic traits. We need it for healthy self-esteem, literally. So they were like, "No, I don't have any." I was like, "Yes, you do. If you prioritize yourself, you have to have a tad bit of a narcissistic trait within you to be able to do that." And people don't realize that that spectrum means that somebody can have more traits than others. But also, a lot of the traits that people are talking about, like the selfishness, the self-centered, we also live in a culture that is very individualistic. So it teaches us in Western culture to be that way. So sometimes it's just the way our culture exists, and it has nothing to do with people being narcissistic. You muted, Amber.
I'm gonna be honest, I had no idea that there was a spectrum scale. By scale, you mean like a theoretical model or
Yep.
like a test?
There's a test, and then there's an actual model, and there's this end of the scale, and this at the furthest end is NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. And then
Oh.
going further down, you got this narcissistic trait. Now, there's several spots on it. So most people, if they're healthy, are going to fall on the spectrum somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and I want to add to that, I was just reading an article about relationships, and like about how people with narcissistic personality disorder kind of like has difficulty with maintaining relationships, but that doesn't mean they can't maintain relationships. And so oftentimes, people, if you're not looking at how this person has basically been in their relationships, like their families, their friends, their coworkers, then girl or sir, what are y'all doing? Like, y'all got to be more observant as to how this person treats other people and what those relationships are like. So I do think it's important that even if he is an asshole, sis, that's gonna come out. Or even if she's an asshole, sir, that's gonna come out. And you're gonna see that when they interact with other people. And then you can start being like, you know what, something right here is not seeming right. You're not you're not keeping these relationships like you should be. And every time you turn around, there's an issue or somebody got something negative to say about them. And if they do have relationships, what is happening in these relationships, or why is your relationship with this person such, in turmoil? And maybe that's something that you have to reassess,
Mhm.
So
Yeah. On to that point, a lot of people, women and men, both assume that other person is a narcissist, but we never ever look at self. We never look at what in us might bring out that this person needs to make things about themselves. So if everything is constantly about you and you want everything to be about you, and this person is like, I'm prioritizing myself this time, that doesn't make them a narcissist. That makes them dealing with another person. That means that they're dealing with you, and sometimes they want to prioritize themselves. And it may look like, they may be self-centered, but sometimes people have to grab what little bit of self-time they can get. And also birth order. Sometimes people are not narcissists. Sometimes they're just born first in their family and everything has been made about them, or they've been the baby in the family and everything's been made about them, or they've been the middle child and they've always been ignored by everybody, and so they've had to center their world around themselves too. So we can't, if I was going to diagnose it, I've diagnosed one person, two people with it. When I diagnose it, you have to take, there's a lot of inventory to take other than just saying he cheated on you. He's definitely a narcissist. Everything's about him. Definitely a narcissist. So there's a lot more that goes into that than just being a jerk in your eyes.
Yeah, definitely. And you forgot, and you always talk about it with me. If you were only child, everything was centered around me. I was the only child.
Oh, if I ever needed proof, them only children are something else. Okay, go ahead.
I was the only
No.
child, and I'm still my mama's only child. So like things were centered around me. And then on top of that, in my family, my mommy's the baby, and I'm her baby. So yep, spoiled. Everybody did everything for me. I was centered, but growing up like that, as you become an adult and as you learn things, yeah, I still get in my moods where I want to be at the center, but I now know that that's not how life works. Like my kids are my center. So that's not how life works. But somebody with true MPD, that wouldn't matter.
And that's the difference in how it presents. So like I was saying earlier, you have some people who are the mean ones, right? Everything's about me, they're abusive. Then you have some people that are just like, I'm just in la la land, like it's my world, and you're not necessarily abusive towards people, you just don't care like about other people's things. But that's where the presentation comes in. You're an only child. If you grew up that way and the world was centered around you and you are later diagnosed with narcissistic personality, you're not going to be the abusive type. It's just like this world is mine. And that's how you look at the world. Mm-hmm. However, there is a link to trauma, which we'll probably talk about in our episode. But when you were traumatized as a child, or not even like, physically abused, but maybe emotionally abused, like you're not good enough. And maybe you're like the first child, but your parents put you down all the time. Then when you finally get a glimpse that you have some kind of strength, you kind of take it out of proportion. Like, oh, this one thing about me is the best thing about me, and it makes me so special and unique. And then you start to put down everyone else because that's what you've seen when you were younger. Those are the abusive types. Mm-hmm. So your childhood and how you were brought up is going to change the presentation of the narcissism or the personality disorder or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about narcissistic personality in our episode. But we have a couple of more personality disorders. We're sticking to the cluster B personality disorder. So it includes 4 different types, and they all have something to do with emotional instability. So let's get into it.
At the cookout, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be.
Now that you've watched our hot sauce where we were talking about personality disorders, we kind of wanted to go into a deeper conversation as to different personality disorders when it comes to the symptoms, the prevalence rates, and the criteria that it meets for you to be diagnosed with a personality disorder. So I, Auntie Keish, want to start off first with narcissistic personality disorder. Now, again, as we talked in the hot sauce, it's a hot word, okay? But I don't think a lot of people understand what entails or what symptoms involve for the personality. So let me run through the criteria really quick to let all y'all know what you need in order to be diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, so first, you have to have a pervasive pattern of grandiosity. So like some sort of like fantasy, like, or behavior, and like a need for admiration. Like this person has to have that, okay? A lack of empathy. They don't care. Okay, they're just not going to understand how much understand your needs over theirs. Okay, and it has to begin at the beginning of adulthood. You need 5 or more symptoms. So when people talk about narcissistic personality disorder, they're only typically naming 1, but really you need 5. Okay, so let me run through what those 5 are. Grandiosity. So your important sense of self, that's all they care about is themselves. I think Auntie Amber said this in a hot sauce. They're preoccupied with unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, ideal love. Like they really think that they are going to be the next, I don't know, Elon Musk or the next Mark Zuckerberg. Like they have that type of mentality. And then they have to believe that there's some like special, unique in some sort of way. Like they think
Can I say one thing real quick with the? Yes. Also, this is like people that are like regular ass people. Like there are people who might become Mark Zuckerberg later on, but with narcissistic personality, it's somebody who doesn't actually really have those talents and skills, but they think they do.
Yep. And they also think that they're special. They're unique. Like, like the whole ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis. No, they really think they really think they David Ruffin out here. They really do. Like, you can't tell them no different. Like, they really do think that. And again, they require everybody requires admiration, But a narcissistic person requires an excessive amount, okay? They want you to admire them all day long, every day. It's excessive. And I think that's the difference between regular admiration or just a baseline level versus a narcissistic person. They also have a entitlement. They have a sense of entitlement. Like they think that people are supposed to give them what they want because of who they are. They feel entitled to those things. They don't feel like they have to earn them. They don't feel like they have to wait their turn. They feel entitled to whatever it is. Sometimes they can take advantage of people. Now, is that something that could happen with a regular person? Yes, absolutely. But again, this is one of the things that may come up for somebody who has a narcissistic personality disorder. They're going to try to exploit you because they want to get what they want to. They want to get what they want to fulfill their needs. And again, lack of empathy. And they even, now this is key now, they even might be envious of others because they may want what they want. Now, I know that jealousy is a type of emotion that we all have. But again, they have to reach a level that's impairment, that literally can destroy a relationship, okay? And then they show arrogance. We all have some sort of little bit of arrogance, okay? But people with narcissistic personality disorder is like very arrogant, like very. So that is the criteria to meet for narcissistic personality disorder. And I really hope that the audience, can take some of that feedback and, have a little bit better understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I would give you an example, but okay, I'm going to give you the example. Now, this only reason why I'm giving you the example is because this person is now out of office, so they're a regular person. And so, for example, when I was watching like things that Donald Trump would say and do, one of the examples that was brought up was crowd size. So when Barack Obama was inaugurated and all that stuff, they showed pictures of crowd size. And he was talking about how all these people came to his inauguration and he inflated those numbers. And then when you really went back, it showed nothing like that. That is an example. I'm not saying he is narcissistic because he's not my client, but that's an example of how someone can inflate something when it's not really true or there because it's a fantasy. He wanted his inauguration, the attendance to look like that. So he inflated that. But of course, when you go back and look, that wasn't true. So that's just an example.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah, and I think the envy part of that comes from them actually feel, so it's kind of like they're empty. So this facade that they put on that they're like unique and special and the whole everything is about them, that's just the face of it. But like inside they feel like they really don't have those qualities. They just have to present that way. And I can say, like I said in the hot sauce, trauma is a big piece of this. This is not me saying that trauma causes you to have narcissistic personality disorder. I am not saying that. But I can say, and it's not very common to diagnose this. So that's also the other piece. Y'all talk about it in social media, like everybody has it. And out of like the 200 evaluations I did this year, I've only diagnosed it twice.
Right.
So, and those two people that I did diagnose, they both had a history of trauma, a history of emotional abuse and verbal abuse, telling them they're not good enough. They're never going to be good enough. Like, why are you even here? Like, you don't deserve to even live. You shouldn't have a family. These things were said to them. And so they develop this inflated sense of self to compensate or overcompensate really for that void that they have or that empty feeling that they have. And it comes off as this like person who is just self-centered, which they are. But I think that's where the envy comes from, is because you actually have the thing that I wish that I had, but I'm gonna tell everybody else I have it because that's just what I need to look like in order for me to feel okay with myself.
Yeah. And to add the clinical sex and gender related, you have to be 18 or over, and as well as at least in the DSM handbook, 50 to 75% of people who get diagnosed are men. That does not mean women can't have it. It just means that more men are diagnosed. And just to piggyback off of what Amber says about like the emptiness and not having that, sometimes narcissistic personality disorder is diagnosed with other disorders like depression, or some type, maybe even a substance use disorder. So they may be doing drugs, alcohol, cocaine. I don't know, but it can be comorbid with other disorders. And even
I
Sometimes
want to
when it's
speak real.
comorbid with what when it's comorbid with like antisocial and stuff like that, that
Mhm.
sometimes it can be malignant narcissists, which is the kind of narcissist that they actually harm people or themselves. They use substances or have a lot of legal troubles. They do stuff to get themselves in trouble all the time at the expense of other people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mhm.
And I just want to speak to Auntie Amber saying how rarely she's actually seen it. According
Mhm.
to Cleveland Clinic's most recent research, only 0.5%, between 0.5 and 5% of people in the United
Yep.
States may have it, meaning, it's not that prevalent. And it's very hard to diagnose, too. I think people have to realize how hard it is to diagnose it. And a lot of people feel like, well, a narcissist will never go to therapy anyway, so they won't be diagnosed. So it has been said that it might be underdiagnosed, but it's still very rare. And just a fun fact, the name comes from Greek mythology. So Narcissus in Greek mythology fell in love with himself, stared at himself in water, and fell in love with his reflection, and literally stared at himself until he died. So when we say it can be detrimental, you love yourself so much that you stare until you die, that's where the name comes from.
Why
But
am I
for
not
real
surprised?
though, it's so irrational. Like I don't know if any of y'all have actually ever met someone that's been diagnosed with it, but it's so irrational. It's like this one guy,
Mhm.
like he was just so like I don't know. He comes in with this flowy robe thing, and he tells me that he can code language in a different way, and other people can't code language in this way, and like he's not talking about like coding, like computer coding or anything. Like he thinks he has some deeper sense of language that no one else had. Like stuff like that is just so like out there. So when you see it, like you gonna know that like it's not what y'all talk about on social
Right.
media. Like this is real irrational stuff. And you're like, bro, like what are you even talking about? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's that Greek stuff definitely look like that for
Well,
sure.
now there are cases informally. They used to call it covert narcissism, and those are people who hide it. They hide their narcissistic beliefs or behaviors. So you can have a more covert version of it, but in somewhere along the line, you're gonna catch something.
The covert narcissists are usually the ones that people are talking about in relationships. That's usually the one that's a little bit hidden, and you might see something like some things come out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's even with like the diagnosis, trauma has to be teased out. So this is not a diagnosis that's just done lightly. That's just taken lightly. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that's
Mhm.
a lot of testing, a lot of sessions, so that you can see why might you be like this. Diagnosis is usually done after everything can be ruled out. So it can't be you were high and you came in the office and said, I can code language. This is an everyday thing that you're doing. Um, just the grandiosity. This is on a larger scale. And what we call that is characterological, where it's just in your character to just be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in terms of diagnosing too, it's also important, like you're saying, Auntie Shook, to have that documented pattern of their behavior in order to diagnose something like this. Because again, it's not taken very lightly. So for these evaluations, I had to talk to the therapist, I had to talk to the parents, I had to talk to friends. Like I wouldn't normally do that for an evaluation, but when it looks like a personality disorder, especially narcissistic, I've got to call and talk to other people. I can't just get that based on what this person um reported to me. So, but you were mentioning earlier about the comorbidity of narcissistic personality and antisocial personality as well. So I do want to talk a little bit about antisocial personality disorder. I don't know why I like this one so much. It's not that I like the it's not that I like the people, but I like this disorder because I work with kids a lot and teenagers and young adults, and I, get these diagnoses of oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, which is really just not following the rules at all. Like you are defiant, you're talking back to your parents every time they tell you to do something. You are completely just refusing to comply with any type of request that anyone of authority has for you. And you're just doing things to violate other people's rights, like or things like hurting animals and like setting fires just to see if you can do it, and just a range of different things with breaking the rules. And so kids and young adults with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, if not treated, are more at risk of developing antisocial personality disorder. And what that is, it's not antisocial like you don't like talking to people. Because y'all, these people will come in for evaluation and they be like, I think I have antisocial personality. Why? Because I don't like talking to people. I want to be to myself. That ain't what it is. It means antisocial in terms of anti social constructs, right? Laws and having to abide by authority and like the social norms. You're anti all of that. So you just don't, you manipulate people, you're deceitful, you're very impulsive. So you just do things without thinking about it. You break the rules or whatever. You don't care. There's no remorse or like any type of empathy for the things that you've done to hurt other people. You really just don't care, but you're just doing this stuff just because. Also, people with antisocial personality are like really, really irritable. They can be very, very aggressive too, especially if you're getting in the way of them doing what they want to do. So that will be either verbal aggression, like threatening other people or just calling people names or whatever, cursing at you, or it can be physical, where they're actually physically harming people because they're getting in the way of whatever goals or ambitions that they have. And then they're just very reckless. So with that impulsivity, there is no sense of safety, or if there is, they really just don't care about it. And like I said, when you're younger, for this particular disorder, I think this is the only one where the symptoms have to start at 15 and older. I think most of the other ones are 18, but for this one, the symptoms start at 15 and then they persist throughout your entire life.
And would they need a diagnosis of conduct disorder first?
No, but more than likely.
Conduct disorder is usually diagnosed when they're a kid, because you can't call them antisocial as a child. So a lot of times the conduct disorder precedes that if they've been in therapy or if they've been evaluated as a child. But you don't have
ODD was as a child, and then conduct disorder was as a teen, and then antisocial disorder was as an adult.
Yeah, in that order. Yeah. But you can have ODD and conduct disorder, can't you?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I think you can have both of them.
Or is it ODD and I might be thinking about ADHD.
Yeah, I don't think you can have the ODD, because if you have conduct disorder, it's just assumed that you have the defiance and the irritability.
Yeah.
Okay. But I will say I don't diagnose conduct disorder with young kids, but I will if I don't generally do it, but if it's like significant where, like I said, they're hurting animals, they're setting fires, they're like physically harming people, I will diagnose it at that age too, like earlier ages. But usually it is
I've diagnosed it.
Disorder.
I've diagnosed conduct disorder one time. I've diagnosed ODD. So ODD is not necessarily, you can work through ODD.
Yeah.
Conduct disorder is typically a little bit hard. In my experience, it's typically a lot harder to work through. So the one that I diagnosed with conduct disorder had all of the above: the setting fires, the hurting animals, the lack of empathy, the actual strong desire for revenge, and like the disrespect for authority, and was very, very manipulative, and was younger, like just a little over 10. And I think you start seeing it a little bit earlier.
Yeah. But in order for it to be,
just for everybody's knowledge that's watching, ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. All right.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, the symptoms will show earlier than 15, but for it to be considered a personality disorder, that's when the symptoms would have at least started by 15 and persisted. So for me, I don't diagnose a personality disorder unless I have like concrete evidence that these symptoms have been present for at least like 2 or 3 years after the age that they put in here. But also with this, I don't diagnose this. I won't diagnose a 15-year-old with antisocial. I'll go conduct disorder. And the reason being is because you have to think about why. Like, why are they behaving this way? Why are they oppositional towards authority figures? Is there any trauma? Is it more of a trauma-related response than it is like an actual personality disorder? And I do feel like the adolescence is a developmental age where things are going to change, so I wouldn't diagnose this one. I haven't diagnosed it in someone as young as 15, but I have like older.
It honestly makes me wonder how often especially Black children who grow up in more urban areas, more like lower poverty areas, how often they would get misdiagnosed with conduct disorder, but it's literally their environment. Like they are responding to environmental factors, or it's more of a nature type of thing versus this is a personality disorder or this is conduct disorder.
They
So
often
to
are.
that point, Ash, conduct disorder and ODD, they can exist together. Um, and the reason why is because ODD is unable to be controlled. Conduct is you can't be controlled and you want to exert control over other people at the same time too. So ODD is you're just oppositionally defiant. That um I don't know the statistics between black and brown kids, but I know that that's usually diagnosed earlier. But like people actually work through that. And I already said that, but I just wanted to clarify that. But then with conduct disorder, it's not an easy diagnosis to give anybody. So I don't know that a lot of black and brown kids are misdiagnosed with that. Or, I mean, I'm sure they probably would be if they all went to therapy because we don't go as much. But it's not something that you just look and you're like, oh, that's conduct disorder. There's a lot of, it's very nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the exact number, but I do believe I read somewhere where black children are disproportionately diagnosed with ODD and conduct disorder because of their cultural presentation and how we respond to different environmental and social events and their perception of our responses or reactions are seen more as aggressive versus seen as just a neurological deficit or just maybe a traumatic response to something. So I would say that's more going along not therapy route but school route, and I think that's where you start the prison to school to prison pipeline, because black children are seen more as aggressive, so then that goes on their record as being ODD because of the teacher's perceptions or observations of students, and then it just keeps going from there. And so unfortunately, I believe that, and there's a lot of providers who steer away from that, just in general with that disorder because of so many, I guess, so many cultural implications when diagnosing that. So I don't know the exact number though, but I have read where we do get disproportionately diagnosed with that. Children, black children.
Oh. So antisocial cannot be diagnosed until you're at least 15. But Auntie Amber says she does not. You don't diagnose it at 15. You'll just put it as a conduct disorder instead.
Yeah.
I've
More often than that, there's some other thing that's going on, and a lot of the times there's a trauma piece to it. Like they're responding this way because they have a traumatic history. Like for example, I had a kid. Can I talk about that? Yeah, I can. So there was a kid that came in and was like, super aggressive towards his stepmom, didn't want to listen to her, would hit, kick her, punch her, lock her out the house, just all of these different things, hurting the animals and all of this. And nobody could figure out why, but nobody told me until I talked to the biological mom that when he was younger, the biological mom was very abusive towards him. So he was this way with all females. Now, all of his teachers were females. All of the people that were running his pro-social activities, I think he was like in baseball and something else, they were female coaches. So it was a trauma response because he wasn't responding well to females, not authority figures in general, which would be ODD. It was just females. So in that case, that's trauma, right? I'm not going to diagnose you with conduct disorder or antisocial personality disorder because that's a trauma response. So there's always something that's going on. And ODD, that's not my favorite diagnosis to give anyways. That's like if I can't find anything else to explain the behavior, there goes ODD.
That's why rule out is so important. That's why
you got to
trying
everything else out.
Yeah, because of the clinical overlap. So it's super important to rule out a lot of things first.
Mm-hmm.
With the one that I diagnosed with conduct disorder, there was no rhyme or reason that anybody could figure out. So, and it was very blatant. So it wasn't, and I think it took me about 2 years to just finally give up and say, you know what? I know that that's what it is because I've tried everything. We've tried everything. And so it wasn't just something that was just like, oh, first few sessions, that's what this is. It didn't go like that. So it was like, getting to know this person, fifth or sixth therapist. That's what I am. You know what I mean? And actually everybody is saying the same thing, and we're seeing patterns from the age of 5. So it definitely wasn't done lightly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's your antisocial. I think people might hear, if you see a person who kills animals or things like that, my immediate thought when I learned about it was, oh, I probably most of your sociopaths are antisocial. The people who grow up and become mass murderers. Like that's the thought that comes in for most people when they hear some of the signs and symptoms.
Can I say something real quick?
Yep.
So I want to give an example because I don't want this to get so nuanced that people are kind of like flustered. If you've ever seen the movie The Good Son with Macaulay Culkin as a child,
I love that movie.
he had, at his age, they would have called it conduct disorder, but he was very much antisocial. And as he got older, that's definitely what he would have been called. And then if you've seen the movie, what is it with it was Orphan, where she was so antisocial, like she was just a kid and there was no trauma and things. I mean, there might have been a little bit of trauma, but she was just manipulative, posing as a child, didn't care about what people thought, was willing to hurt other people, did not follow social constructs. The rules just did not apply to her. That's another one to let you know, like that can kind of give you an example. And those are Hollywood examples, and they're super, super over dramatized, but that's a good example of you to just watch and look.
Mm-hmm.
And just so you know, sociopath is no longer a diagnosis, so it goes under antisocial. So when you see somebody that is presenting with the sociopathic tendencies, that's antisocial personality disorder. It's the same thing.
All right. So hope everybody learned a little bit about antisocial personality disorder there. So for me, I took on histrionic personality disorder, which is really not diagnosed a lot. So I'm going to tell y'all a little bit about histrionic personality disorder and give y'all some information on it. So really it's this pervasive pattern of consistent attention seeking and emotional dysregulation. So according to the DSM-5, the criteria that you must meet, and you have to meet 5 or more of the following. You have to be uncomfortable when you are not the center of attention, seductive or provocative behavior, shifting and shallow emotions, uses appearance to draw attention, impressionistic and vague speech, dramatic or exaggerated emotions, suggestible, meaning you're easily influenced by others, and you consider relationships more intimate than what they are. So, like, you thinking this person loves me and they want to be with me and I want to be with them, and they have given you no indication of such. So, some of the causes of this could be genetic. It tends to run in families. So, if somebody is actually diagnosed with this, there is a high likelihood that somebody else in their family has it also. Okay. Childhood trauma. Children cope with trauma such as child abuse and such, or a death of a family member. They might later become that adult who falls into these particular criteria. And also parenting styles. So if you parent with a lack of boundaries, or you are overindulgent with your children or inconsistent, they are more likely to develop histrionic personality disorder. And in addition, parents who display dramatic, erratic, volatile, or inappropriate sexual behavior put their children at risk for developing this disorder. So, characteristically, this is a person who has lower self-esteem. So they're always attention seeking. It's not just your person who, likes compliments or seems a little bit cocky or confident. They are literally always seeking attention, and usually in very provocative, seductive ways. So I'm gonna give a movie example like Auntie Suge did, so y'all can know it. Oh God, any movie you can basically think of where you have someone going after a man that's already taken and he really don't want her. Like when you think about the movie that Beyonce played in, where old girl was after Idris Elba.
Obsessed.
Obsessed. That
We just talked about that.
That would be an example of histrionic personality disorder.
Well, I've never diagnosed nor have I met anyone with histrionic personality. I think it's really, really rare.
Mm-hmm.
Like the percentage is like point
Yeah.
like 2 or
It's
something
like
like that.
0.3, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's one, I think it's probably one of the ones that would be really hard, because if you just go off of attention seeking behavior in our society now, a lot of people would get diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder. Social media alone, and just like having a Instagram presence or a like that right there, everybody is kind of seeking attention in that way if you do that. So if you just went off the attention seeking part of it, a lot of people probably in this day and age will be misdiagnosed with histrionic disorder, but you have to meet those other criteria as well. And the last criteria is the one, when I was learning about it originally, I was like, ooh, I know a whole bunch of people that fall into that. You think a situation is more intimate than it really is? Like, you think you in a relationship. You ain't in a relationship. He or she don't want you like that.
So I wonder if it's just like the prevalence rate is so low because it's just not diagnosed that much, because it can be explained by other things.
It can be explained away.
Yeah, because as you're talking about it, I'm not really like, I'm looking for the extremes. Like, where is the extreme for it to be considered a clinical personality disorder? And it just sounds like you said, the attention seeking. And I've met people like that, but I guess the drama and the theatrical piece to it is probably what makes it histrionic.
That was
And
speaking.
sometimes we just say like that person is super histrionic instead of giving them the whole personality disorder. Because
Yeah.
sometimes the traits just pop out and you go, oh, so histrionic, all the
Yeah.
dramatics of it. But what she's talking about is extensive.
And I think two things that make it, will put it out there a little bit more, is that rapidly shifting and shallow emotions, like rapidly shifting. Their emotions shift fast. Like they go from 0 to 100 real quick. And then also the being overly concerned with physical appearance and the inappropriate sexual behavior. Because the inappropriate sexual behavior will show up even with people they are not sexually attracted to.
Okay, then because I was trying to figure out the same thing. I'm like, well, how do we tell the difference between a trauma related, you know what I mean, like versus this? Because if that's the case, I was like, well, damn, everybody got a history of it.
All of us.
But okay, but now that you put it in that way, that somebody will be sexually attracted to somebody that's really not like.
Yeah. They will have inappropriate sexual actions towards somebody that they're not even sexually attracted to.
Okay.
And they have extreme difficulty maintaining relationships because they seem so fake and shallow in their interactions, and they need instant gratification. Like they get bored very, very fast. Like
okay.
It is quicker than what anybody would consider normal.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sounds like this is something that you definitely have to like rule out, like a lot of
rule out a lot. You have to rule out a lot. Okay. So histrionic personality disorder is typically not diagnosed until you're 18 or older. You have to be 18 or older. But it does start in childhood. It's one of the ones that actually does start in childhood. They just won't diagnose it until you're 18. So they do look for things that happen in your childhood and adolescent development to kind of make sure, but they won't diagnose it until you're over 18 or older. And it can be difficult to diagnose, since most people with a personality disorder don't think there's a problem with their behavior or way of thinking. And when they do seek help, it's often for conditions of anxiety and depression due to the problems that have been created by the personality disorder. So like a lot of times you'll get more people with this disorder in couples therapy dealing with divorce. Like that's one of the things that actually does show up. You'll get somebody, if somebody's been married 5 or 6 times and they cannot maintain any of their relationships, they commonly had a lot of girlfriends or boyfriends, broke up a lot. Like that's one of the things that could show up. Like you just cannot maintain a relationship at all. So you present like, my relationships just don't last and I'm having problems in relationships, but this could be the other side of it.
Yeah,
Ooh,
and
I
I
can see
think
that
that's
being
where
mixed up. Go ahead, Amber.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think that goes for all personality disorders. There is
Mm-hmm.
an aspect of the interpersonal conflict. That's how we identify it to begin with. That's the
Yep.
first question I ask. Like, do you have friends? Are you able to keep friends? How are your romantic relationships? How are your family relationships? That tells me whether I even need to take the time to evaluate for a personality disorder, because that is like what's the word? The biggest part of personality disorders just in general.
That's the foundation, the crucial thing.
Foundation,
When you
monumental. It's a V word I was thinking of. I can't think of it.
when you do your initial evaluation, when we do our initial evaluation, relationships is on there also, because it's kind of
Mhm.
like how we were taught in school, the MMAD, where it's like mood, mania, anxiety, depression. Like it's kind of one of those things that you kind of slide in there so you can say, okay, let me rule that out, let me rule that out, let me rule that out. But I like that Ash said relationships are unstable, because I love borderline. Okay, I just like to talk about it. I won't say I love a borderline, but I will say I do like to talk about it. And one of the biggest things in that one is relationships are very unstable. There's extreme instability. So borderline can also stem from childhood trauma. Actually, it does stem from childhood trauma most of the times. So when you see somebody with unstable relationships, they can't keep a man, they have or a woman, they can't keep friends. They're always in turmoil in their relationships, and they have a problem with everybody. Typically, when you have a problem with everybody, it's you. So, and I mean everybody. Every time you touch somebody, every time you talk to somebody, every time you have a relationship with somebody, there's this big emotional reaction in a relationship, or a big fallout. And it might result in splitting. Like, one minute you are the best person I ever knew, and then the next minute you ain't crap. And you know what? You've always hurt me my whole life. And you know what? This is the way it goes. That's called splitting. So that's a big look, I'm stuck like Amber. That's a big thing in borderline personality disorder, is that they split. So you'll start seeing that in their relationships. Also, abandonment. And it's difficult because even with histrionic, I don't know if abandonment is a big catalyst in histrionic, but I know in borderline is huge, because you always think that people are trying to leave you, or you have problems with abandonment. Or there's a book called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. Those are feelings called I hate you, don't leave me. So I'm pushing you away, but then at the same time, I need you to be back in my life, because guess what? I need you around so I can keep on taking you on this crazy emotional roller coaster. Um, Unstable self-image. You don't know who you are. There is a disconnect between who you really are, or who you grew up to be, and who you're presenting as right now. Your image is always unstable, or extremely low self-esteem, because that's also some unstable self-image too. Um, Impulsive behavior. Sometimes it looks like ADHD. Sometimes it looks like you just be doing cuss. And you don't just be doing cuss. Sometimes you just are borderline and things just happen. So there could be a small situation, and now you've made it into a gigantic ordeal because your emotions are so out of whack, and you just do things to piss yourself or other people off, and now it's got to be a big ordeal. Also, intense emotional reactions to small stimulus. That can look like ADHD too, but if you already have all the other criteria, that's what it looks like. So it might be constant anger, uncontrolled anger. When you get mad, nobody can reel you in. Reckless behavior, reckless driving. A lot of times people with borderline personality disorder have self-harm. So, excuse me. Sometimes they might use their self-harm to control you. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself. They might start off with cutting, just binge eating, self-harm behavior. Um, that's just some of the criteria. I can go on all day, but I know that they're difficult to deal with in relationships. Sometimes you might think you're in a relationship with a narcissist, and that person might just be borderline. And borderline, I'm pretty sure, is diagnosed more than narcissism, because borderline comes from hurt and trauma. And you know, if your dad left you at a young age, your mom left you at a young age, now you're afraid to lose different relationships, and now you're presented as borderline. So sometimes we see it in the midst of it happening, happening where we might say, I think she's setting up borderline, because all these things are going to come after all this trauma starts to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
What y'all got?
Borderline is one of the only ones that I've actually seen myself with a client. And funny thing, I saw it with just one client, and then also I worked with a gentleman who was literally seeking therapy because his wife was diagnosed with borderline. So he was on the side of, how as a partner do I deal with somebody with borderline? So that was interesting. Trying to teach somebody how to deal with that, because one of the things that kept coming up is, if you are with someone and you feel like you are constantly walking on eggshells and you don't know when they might blow up, they like, you could say something and they fine 1 minute with it, and then the next minute they blow up. My client was like, I'm always walking on eggshells. I don't know what to say and what might trigger this situation. And so you teaching somebody how to deal with that, you have to learn that you have to be clear with people like that. You have to set clear boundaries. As the person in that person's life, you cannot allow them to just walk all over you because you fear how they're going to react.
There's a big problem with boundaries that people who have borderline have. There's actually a website, borderlinepersonality.org. There are resources that teach people how to deal with the borderline personality, because it is so difficult. And there's so much gaslighting to where you might be like, is it me? They cause you to question yourself, like, it's gotta be me. Okay, let me go back and go. You will do so much self-reflection dealing with a borderline person before you realize, you know what, it's definitely you. But they have a tendency to make you feel like it's you. And then, like you said, walking on eggshells, and then you kind of don't know what to do. It's the biggest mind cuss ever.
I would say borderline is probably my least favorite of all to treat. And that's why I do not work with borderline personality anymore. I do evaluations for it, but I don't do treatment. It's exhausting, and it sucks the life out of you. And you have to think so much, like as a clinician in the session. If I make a facial expression, if I smirk a certain way, they're going to think that I'm judging them or criticizing them or whatever. And so there's just so much that goes into it. And when you have one client with borderline personality, it's like having three. And it's a lot. So I don't do that anymore. But I have seen it quite a bit. And I think because it's probably one of the more common personality disorders that are diagnosed, they do have treatment for it, which is dialectical behavior therapy. I'm not trained in that, but I have seen the effects of it, and it is very effective if that person adheres to the treatment. It includes individual therapy, it includes group skills training, group therapy, and then also like phone coaching and phone calls with that therapist. So again, having one person or one client with borderline personality, you're having to do all of this with them. So it's like having multiple clients. So in order to treat people with borderline personality, you do have to have the mental capacity and a lighter caseload in order to do that, because it is a lot of work.
Yes,
Hey, Amber, I would cut out the part where you said that it's hard to treat them, only because I seen on Twitter they going after therapists who talking about what they don't like and how it's stigmatizing borderlines and whoever going to therapy. I don't want you to get ate up if somebody hear that.
Oh, I'm fine with that, because my preferred,
Okay.
like I say, I prefer to work with children and teens and young adults. That's my preference.
Yep.
As a clinician, I've trained this much. I've gotten to this point to where I can like make that statement. I don't feel like I'm effective in treating people with borderline personality. Like I just feel like I'm so much in my head and my anxiety goes up so much that I'm not effective in treating you. So I would prefer to refer you to someone else who has the mental capacity, the ability, and the training to do so.
Okay.
And I'll add that part in there. Just to
add that part too.
Yeah, I'll leave it in there.
I didn't want my auntie Amber getting ate up, because you know how people just like
I got your
stuff.
one.
And I seen that on Twitter, and I was like, oh geez.
I wish they might.
No,
they might.
I'm trying.
it be the way people say it though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Like,
was going off on Twitter like, why y'all like say that y'all don't like treating certain people, and then you wonder why people don't go to therapy, and then I'm like, ugh, they don't understand specialization. People,
Not even specialization. They don't
this is my
understand.
favorite.
They don't understand that if you are not, if you don't feel confident as a therapist dealing with certain things, you could actually do more harm than good. I don't want to
right,
harm anybody. So if I
right.
say I don't think I would work well with this particular population, that has to be okay. Because do you want help or do you want me to jack some shit up?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think you know what, honestly, it probably opens up a bigger conversation as to treating different personalities and
Mm-hmm.
how, I may not do well with antisocial, or, Auntie Amber says she doesn't do well with, borderlines. So that makes sense. And if that's not our specialty, we want to make sure that you get in the hands of the right therapist who can treat those type of symptoms that you're having. So that does make sense.
And,
I
and,
just I'm just looking out for you, Amber. I didn't
yeah,
want you to get hit
and,
up because
I
now we got to
appreciate
fight.
that.
and
Should be on
I,
my ass about fighting this stuff. And this time I'm gonna be what you say.
I do feel you though,
No, it's
Amber,
cool.
because the one time I took on the client, and I knew because she, first of all, she put her diagnosis on the intake paperwork, and at the time my supervisor was like, "You could say no." I was like, "You know what? Nope. Let me go ahead. Let me handle the fear that I have of dealing with personality disorders." Oh my God, one time I had to reschedule a session. She texts all day. You hate me. You just don't want to work with me anymore. Like you learned my diagnosis and now you don't want to work with me anymore. I was like, I never said I what? Wait, I got a doctor's appointment. Like I felt like I had to explain. Like, no, no, no. I don't hate you. I just have a doctor's appointment. I promise. I was like, I will show you the doctor's note. I was like, no, if I gotta do all that,
That's what I'm
I won't be able to do this.
that's what I'm
It's a
saying.
lot.
Because part of it is setting boundaries with them. And if that's your response, like as a clinician, then you're not helping them
Mm-hmm.
set those boundaries. You're
Not
not you're
That's
helping.
not
what I was gonna
saying
say.
like that ain't none of your business.
Right.
But
That's not my business. I just have
and
to
that's how
reschedule.
I am, because I'm like, I don't want you feeling like I did something to you. I'm a people pleaser, right? So like I don't want, so I can't work with them just because
Right.
I'm not helping you.
I'm not gonna
And I'm
set the
not trained.
boundaries clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had to set strict boundaries. Even with time, because sometimes with time it's like, oh my God, you were late for the session, and it threw my whole life off. And so like just kind of working with getting those boundaries together. I know Keish does DBT. You okay.
I
So
do.
I'm not as well versed on DBT, but I can treat people with borderline. So I'll get the techniques and stuff like that. But I think in order not to do any harm and in order to just do some good justice to a client, I think getting like well versed in DBT is probably the best. So that's my next endeavor.
So I am trained in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And if you don't know, there's 4 areas that it focuses on, which is distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, and emotion regulation. And within those areas, there are definitely a whole bunch of interventions that can be used across the board
Mm-hmm.
for treating any disorder that I think that could be useful. And it's developed by Marsha Linehan. So,
I like DBT. I've used the interventions with self-harm clients, suicidal ideation.
mhm,
In any case where I see like, okay, you need to learn how to manage your emotions better. You can't emotionally regulate. Like I will go straight to a DBT intervention because it is really good.
it is.
Yeah, and I think some of the distress tolerance
Yep.
skills with even with kids or
Mhm.
teenagers with
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and depression, and it's super helpful. But with all of this, we talked about all of the cluster B personality disorders, and y'all ain't even gonna believe it. There are 2 other clusters of personality disorders. And so maybe the aunties will hit on that another time, but we hope y'all learned something today. And if y'all have any questions or any comments, y'all just let us know. And should
So what y'all about to do?